Beginning in 1929, the Great Depression became the worst financial and economic crisis in American history. Banks failed across the country, businesses closed, and millions of Americans lost their jobs and life savings. By the early 1930s, nearly 1 in 4 workers was unemployed, and families relied on breadlines and soup kitchens to survive. At the same time, severe drought and poor farming practices devastated the Great Plains. Dust storms stripped away topsoil, destroyed crops, and forced thousands of farming families from their homes in what became known as the Dust Bowl. Men traveled in search of work, women struggled to provide with shrinking resources, and millions of children grew up amid uncertainty, loss, and impoverishment. The images that follow show daily life during that tumultuous period in American history, a time of severe hardship and poverty for millions of hardworking Americans across the country. This is their story. Welcome to Animata Historia, breathing life into historic photographs from around the world to remind us of how we used to live, where we came from, and what made us who we are today. In this episode, we are reanimating photographs of the Great Depression in America during the 1930s. The Great Depression was the longest and most severe economic downturn in modern history. While it began in the United States with the Wall Street crash of 1929, it rapidly became a global crisis characterized by mass unemployment, acute deflation, and a collapse in international trade. In 1929, confidence in the American economy collapsed. After years of rapid growth and widespread stock speculation, investors began selling their shares in panic. On October 24th, known as Black Thursday, the stock market plunged. 5 days later, on Black Tuesday, prices fell even further, wiping out billions of dollars in wealth. Banks, businesses, and ordinary Americans were deeply affected. Many people had invested their savings or borrowed money to buy stocks, and when the market crashed, those losses spread quickly through the economy. The Wall Street crash did not cause the Great Depression on its own, but it marked the moment when economic weakness became impossible to ignore. What followed was a decade of bank failures, unemployment, and hardship that reshaped American life. Unemployment during the Great Depression reached the highest level in American history. By 1933, nearly 1 in 4 Americans was out of work. For millions, jobs disappeared for years, not months, and crowded employment offices became symbols of a nation struggling to survive without steady income or security. The FSA Photographers. In 1935, as the Great Depression deepened, the federal government created the Farm Security Administration to address widespread rural poverty and displacement. Part of that effort included an unprecedented decision to hire photographers to document the lives of struggling Americans. The goal was not propaganda, but visibility, to show the nation what the economic crisis looked like beyond statistics and headlines. Photographers were sent across the country to record farm families, migrant workers, small towns, and city streets. They captured hunger, loss, and uncertainty, but also resilience and dignity. These images were published in newspapers, magazines, and government reports, shaping public understanding of the Depression and building support for New Deal relief programs. Relief mattered because millions of Americans were struggling to survive. Unemployment reached nearly 25%, and countless families had no income at all. The work of the FSA photographers created one of the most important visual records in American history. Not only did their images document the hardships suffered by those affected, they also changed how Americans saw one another and how the nation understood its responsibility to those in need. The most famous of the FSA photographers was Dorothea Lange, whose photographs gave a human face to hardship. What made Lange stand out was not just what she photographed, but how she saw people. Her images treated struggling Americans with dignity, individuality, and quiet strength, rather than spectacle or pity. She traveled across the American West, photographing migrant workers, displaced families, and rural poverty with an uncommon empathy and restraint. Photographs like Migrant Mother helped put faces to national suffering and directly influenced public opinion, shaping support for New Deal relief programs. Lange's work proved that photography could be both art and evidence, and that images could change policy by making hardship impossible to ignore. In an interview discussing the photographs, Lange explained the moment when she first approached the woman and her family.
I saw and approached the hungry and desperate mother as if drawn by a magnet. I do not remember how I explained my presence or my camera to her, but I do remember she asked me no questions.
The woman in Lange's most famous photograph was Florence Owens Thompson, a farm laborer and mother struggling to survive during the Great Depression. When Dorothea Lange photographed her in 1936 at a pea pickers camp in California, Florence was just 32 years old and caring for 7 children. The family had been living hand to mouth, following seasonal work, often sleeping in tents or cars. Here we see Florence and one of her children in full color, as she might have looked the day the famous photo was taken. The crop had failed, food was scarce, and her children were hungry. Lange's image captured poverty, responsibility, and resolve. Florence's worried gaze and her children turned inward for comfort came to symbolize the hardship faced by millions of Americans. Yet Florence herself never sought fame. She later said she felt the photograph showed her strength as much as her suffering. Just like Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans was another photographer who became nationally known largely because of his Depression-era work. He brought a quiet, uncompromising clarity to the Farm Security Administration's work. Where Dorothea Lange focused on human emotion and intimacy, Evans documented America with stark precision: storefronts, tenant farmers, roadside signs, and bare interiors, recording the structures of poverty as much as its faces. His photographs were direct, unsentimental, and deliberately plain. Evans believed that truth did not need embellishment. By showing everyday life exactly as it was, he created an enduring visual record of a country under strain, stripped of illusion. Together with the other FSA photographers, Evans's work helped define documentary photography itself, proving that photographs could be both factual evidence and lasting art, and ensuring that the Great Depression would be remembered not just as an economic collapse, but as a lived experience etched into American life. However, what truly set Evans apart was how he approached those images. He treated documentary photography as a serious art form, insisting on neutrality, clarity, and restraint. His FSA photographs led directly to major recognition, including his landmark 1938 exhibition and Book American Photographs at the Museum of Modern Art, the first solo photography show in MoMA's history. Following his success, Walker Evans published Let Us Now Praise Famous Men in 1941, a collaboration with writer James Agee. Though it was largely overlooked at first, it later became one of the most important documentary works of the 20th century. Speaking after the publication of his book, Evans said,
"I suppose I was interested in calling attention to something and even shocking people. But I don't think I had the purpose of improving the world. The work produced in the Depression looks like social protest, though it wasn't intended to be used as propaganda for any cause."
Among the most influential photographers hired by the FSA was Arthur Rothstein, who helped shape the visual language of the Great Depression. His images of drought-stricken farms, abandoned land, and Dust Bowl devastation made the environmental crisis visible to the nation. He was especially skilled at showing how economic collapse and ecological disaster were intertwined. Speaking about his experience of working in the Dust Bowl, Rothstein said,
"The buildings, barns, and sheds were almost buried by drifts. The land and sky seemed to merge until there was no horizon."
Rothstein was only 21 years old when he captured this iconic image of farmer Arthur Cobble and his two sons running from the dust to a dilapidated shed, past fence posts nearly submerged in dust. Despite claims that the scene was staged, the Cobbles insisted that it was not, and to this day, it remains one of the most emblematic images of the struggles endured during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. Like Evans and Lang, Arthur Rothstein is recognized as one of the great photojournalists of the 20th century. Life in the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl unfolded at the same time as the Great Depression, turning an economic collapse into an environmental disaster. As jobs vanished and banks failed, vast areas of the Great Plains were struck by relentless drought. Years of deep plowing and over-farming had stripped the land of its native grasses, leaving the soil loose and exposed. When the rains stopped and the winds came, the earth itself began to blow away. Massive dust storms darkened the sky, buried farms, and made the land nearly impossible to live on. Crops failed year after year. Livestock starved. Families struggled to breathe as dust seeped into homes, lungs, and food. What had once been productive farmland became unrecognizable. Fields turned to dunes, fences disappeared, and entire communities were pushed to the brink. The hardest-hit areas stretched across the southern Great Plains, especially parts of Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico. This region became known simply as the Dust Bowl. Hundreds of thousands of people were forced to abandon their land, many migrating west in search of work, often finding only poverty and hardship waiting for them. For those who remained, survival became a daily struggle. The Dust Bowl did not just destroy land, it uprooted lives, reshaped communities, and revealed how fragile the balance between people, the economy, and the environment could be when all three collapsed at once. For drought-stricken families in the Dust Bowl, displacement meant constant motion. The land had failed, and staying was no longer an option. Families packed what they could, left everything else behind, and moved forward with no clear destination. Dust filled the air, food was scarce, and uncertainty followed every mile. Survival depended on one thing: keeping the family together and moving on. This family of migrant workers fleeing from the drought in 1936 found themselves lodging in an Oklahoma camp by the roadside in Blythe, California. In this photo from 1935, we see three girls modeling various Dust Bowl masks, which were to be worn in areas where the amount of dust in the air caused breathing difficulties. It's hard to imagine having to survive on a day-to-day basis in such extreme conditions. In this 1938 image, a government agent interviews a prospective resettlement client in Garrett County, Maryland. The Farm Security Administration created resettlement and migratory labor camps to offer shelter, sanitation, and a chance at stability for families who had lost their land. Eligibility was based on need, farmers ruined by drought, debt, or foreclosure, and workers forced to follow crops from state to state. The camps were meant to help: clean water, shelter, a place to stop moving. But reaching them meant admitting that home was gone, that the land could no longer provide. For many, entering a camp meant survival, but it also meant surrendering independence. These interviews decided who qualified, who would be helped, and who would be turned away. Being moved into a camp carried mixed emotions: relief at having food and shelter, and shame at being labeled destitute. Families who once owned homes now lived under government supervision, unsure how long they would stay or where they would go next. For families who had worked their own soil for generations, living in a government camp was both humiliating and extremely depressing. Though grateful for the assistance in such extreme and severe times, relief came with rules and safety came with scrutiny. And no proud or independent person enjoys being scrutinized. Nobody back then was looking for handouts or charity. They were looking for a way back to dignity, without knowing if it even still existed. The FSA's migratory labor camps were created as a response to the humanitarian crisis. Hundreds of thousands of families, driven from their land by drought, debt, and foreclosure, were living in roadside ditches, irrigation canals, and makeshift camps with no sanitation, no clean water, and little protection from exploitation. These camps were not comfortable places, but they were orderly, regulated, and for many families, safer than anything they had known in years.
So children, spelling is very important. It helps us to
Education was a central part of camp life. Temporary schools were established so children could attend classes without being pulled constantly from one district to another as their families moved for work. Teachers were often hired directly by the FSA or worked in cooperation with local school systems. Lessons were basic: reading, writing, arithmetic. But for many children, this was the first sustained schooling they had received in years. Schools also provided meals, medical checks, and a sense of routine. In a life defined by uncertainty, the classroom became one of the few stable places where children were treated not as migrant laborers, but as students with a future beyond the fields. Families lived in tents or small wooden cabins, often with only the one room which was shared by both the parents and their children. Water was provided through communal spigots. Latrines, bathhouses, and laundry facilities were maintained, basic standards that had been absent in most informal camps.
It's okay, sweetie. We'll go and play outside soon, I promise.
Medical care was limited but available, and inspectors monitored sanitation to prevent outbreaks of disease, but entry into these camps was not a given. Each family had to prove they had no alternative before being offered accommodation. Background checks were conducted, rules were enforced, and alcohol was strictly prohibited. Residents were expected to keep their spaces clean, send children to camp schools, and participate in self-governance through camp councils. This structure was intentional, designed to restore stability and dignity, not dependency. Yet life inside the camps remained precarious. Work was seasonal and uncertain. Wages were low, and families could be forced to move again at a moment's notice when crops failed or harvests ended. Privacy was scarce, and an underlying fear of removal never fully disappeared. For many, the camps represented a painful contradiction, relief that came only after losing everything else. Compared to the roadside camps they replaced, FSA camps offered something rare during the Depression: clean water, safety, and the sense of being seen by the federal government as citizens worth protecting. They did not end poverty. They did not solve displacement. But for families who had been invisible, they marked the first time the government acknowledged that survival itself was a public responsibility. However, the stark reality at the time was that the FSA could only serve a small fraction of the displaced population during the 1930s. At the height of the Dust Bowl and Depression, hundreds of thousands of families were on the move. But FSA migratory labor camps had very limited capacity. This meant that families had to be creative and find shelter by any means possible. On this occasion, we see the children of a migrant family living in a trailer in the middle of a field in Arizona. In this image from 1935, we see a family making the most of a scrapped motor car to create some kind of tent awning to expand their cramped living space as much as possible. Like I said earlier, creativity is key when you have limited resources and so much at stake. Of the 2.5 to 3 million migrants in need of shelter, the camps built by the FSA could only ever house tens of thousands of them at any given time. This meant that even at its peak, well under 10% of displaced families were ever accommodated. Migrant workers' camps like these were built by the many families turned away by the FSA. They were settlements built from scraps and necessity, a temporary answer to hunger and displacement during the worst years of the Depression. Without access to FSA housing, displaced workers settled wherever land was unused. Riverbanks, fields, roadsides. There was no clean water, no sanitation, no protection. Only proximity to work and the hope of survival. During the Great Depression, poor health became a daily reality for migrant families. By the mid-1930s, up to half of migrant children were malnourished, leaving them weak, anemic, and vulnerable to disease. Infections that were treatable elsewhere often became deadly. In the early 30s, tuberculosis alone killed nearly 90,000 Americans each year, striking the poor the hardest. Babies were especially at risk. While the national infant mortality rate was 56 deaths per 1,000 births, children born into extreme poverty faced far worse odds. Many survived sickness only to carry its effects for life, such as damaged lungs, stunted growth, and chronic fatigue. The poor mother pictured here had to cope with the loss of her 2-year-old baby, who died during the winter as a result of exposure. She was sent back to Oklahoma by the Relief Administration, along with her husband and her 2 children. Diseases like dysentery spread quickly, especially among children, turning hunger into dehydration and sickness into death. Migrant families living in the Dust Bowl survived on the cheapest food they could find. Meals were built around bread, beans, potatoes, and cornmeal, cooked with lard and washed down with weak coffee. Fresh fruit, vegetables, milk, and meat were rare. The food kept hunger away, but not illness. For many children, it meant growing up underfed, weakened, and always hungry. With little clean water and almost no sanitation, waste contaminated food and drinking supplies, dysentery spread quickly, especially among children, turning hunger into dehydration and sickness into death. Life on the road. For those families who weren't accepted into the federal FSA camps, there was often no refuge at all. By 1933, nearly 15 million Americans were unemployed, and millions more were forced from their homes. An estimated 1.5 to 2 million people became transient, living without a fixed place to settle. These families spent years on the road, not weeks or months. They moved from camp to camp, state to state, chasing seasonal farm work or rumors of jobs that often vanished before they arrived. Federal surveys in the mid-1930s found many migrant families had been displaced for 3 to 5 years or longer. Children grew up in tents, cars, boxcars, and roadside shelters, often without regular schooling or medical care. For families shut out of organized camps, homelessness was not temporary. It became a way of life, defined by constant movement, exhaustion, and survival without stability. This woman from Missouri had spent 7 months in the Dust Bowl with a family of 5. She described her situation as broke with a sick baby and car trouble. She is seen here stranded roadside with all her belongings and a poorly child. This unemployed tenant farmer is also having car trouble after leaving his own drought-stricken farm in the hope of finding work at another more lucrative site somewhere outside of the Dust Bowl. Life in the city. In cities across the country, families built makeshift homes from scrap wood, tin, and cardboard. These settlements became known as Hoovervilles, a bitter nickname aimed at Herbert Hoover, the 31st President of the United States, serving from 1929 to 1933. He came to term at the onset of the Great Depression and quickly became the scapegoat for that entire era, as the man responsible for the plight of the country.
They laid off another 100 men at the factory. Where does it end? I don't know how much longer we can last out here.
This particular Hooverville stood on the edge of Central Park. Although much smaller in size than those in Seattle and near St. Louis, the image shows a stark contrast between poverty and privilege. Behind the shacks, luxury apartment buildings rose into the skyline, their windows looking out over families struggling simply to survive. By 1933, the Great Depression had stripped thousands of Americans of work and shelter. In Seattle, they built a city from scraps along the rail yards and waterfront. This was Seattle's Hooverville. The shacks were made from driftwood, crates, and tar paper. There was no electricity, no running water, and little protection from cold or fire. Most residents were unemployed men, many of them veterans, surviving on day labor, soup kitchens, and shared supplies. Life in the cities during the Depression was defined by uncertainty. Men searched endlessly for work, lining up at soup kitchens or wandering block to block in hope of a day's labor. City folk made money in any way they could, and prices were kept as low as possible in an era where the term disposable income simply had no meaning at all. Unemployment compensation only began reaching people about 6 to 8 years after the crisis began and quickly became one of the most important structural changes of the New Deal era. By the end of the 1930s, the economy slowly started to recover. Banks were stable again. Factories were producing more. But unemployment remained high, and many families were still struggling to get by. The Depression had loosened its grip, not released it. With another war on the horizon, government spending surged. Orders poured into factories. Jobs returned in massive numbers, and production ran day and night. The economy recovered gradually, but it was World War II that completed the process. By the early 1940s, full employment had returned, and the long shadow of the Great Depression finally began to lift.